Man, that song fired me up. I love this audio library that I have put together for the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. It's been fun. So there you have it. That is the UFC intro song. If you are a massive MMA fan, you should know that that is Face the Pain by Stem. And of course, I own no rights to that song, nor does anyone else but Stem, but the UFC, as well as the UFC, obviously. But yeah, that song really pumps me up. When that song comes on and it's fight time, I'm ready to just get it going. It fires me up. It gives me the chills, to be quite honest. And as I gear up for UFC 232, December 29th, Saturday night, Jon Jones, Alexander Gustaffson. I cannot wait for this rematch. For my money, this is one of the best rematches in UFC history, maybe the biggest rematch in UFC history, because the first fight was so great. The first fight was one of the greatest fights in general in UFC history, one of the greatest title fights ever as well. And it features two guys that fought each other 5 years ago at UFC 165. Jon Jones and Alexander Gustaffson for 25 minutes went to war. Jon Jones going into that fight, the pound-for-pound best fighter on planet Earth, undefeated, no true loss on his record outside of a disqualification loss to Matt Hamill. But outside of that, this guy has been a dominant champion, and I can't wait to see him back in the cage. To be quite honest, as a fan, as a fight fan, Jon Jones is the guy that he's just as legit as any. But there's a difference between what I want to happen and what I think will happen. And what I think will happen has already been said. I've already gone into detail about that, referring to what I think could potentially happen. I believe Jon Jones will win this fight. I think Jon Jones will show true heart, true determination as a champion and put on a vintage Jon Jones performance and maybe even finish Alexander Gustafsson. But if you were to ask me what I want to happen, that's a completely different story. It's no secret that Jon Jones had a lot of transgressions throughout his career and his personal life. He's done a lot of really bad things in his personal life that have really put a black eye on the UFC, pun intended. And to me, as a fan, as a writer, as a podcast host, these last few years, talking about Jon Jones has been very tough for me to do in any sort of positive light, given the fact that this is a gentleman that, hit a pregnant woman with his vehicle, fled the accident, didn't know anything as far as her safety, didn't know anything as far as where she was at or how she was feeling, and didn't know that the woman was pregnant, obviously, but that's outside of the point. He hit a woman's car that was in her car while she was pregnant and fled the scene. Hit and run. Which, if it were me that did that, if it were you that did that, the average human being, not Jon Jones, the UFC light heavyweight champion of the world, the pound-for-pound greatest fighter in MMA at that time, we would be probably still in prison for that. Or at the very least would have served, a certain amount of time and had to, do serious community service, probation officer, the whole thing. Depending on the situation, obviously, depending on the state and all that government crap. So it's very tough for me to talk about Jon Jones in a positive light. And I remember I was meeting with some people to talk about MMA and talk about me possibly joining them in an MMA role. And I ended up joining them in an MMA role, but they didn't know much about the sport. They knew that there were some guys from New York that were MMA stars, guys like Jon Jones, guys like Rashad Evans from our own Niagara Falls, New York, and Jon Jones from Endicott, New York, which is right outside of Rochester. And they basically said, well, we want you to take this position. we really like you. We think you're great. You know the sport. You know the fighters. You cover it real well. You speak real well. All that great stuff. It was great hearing that from these particular gentlemen, because these are guys that have been in the business for quite a long time. It was a true honor to be offered that position and ultimately get that position. But they didn't know much about MMA, and they wanted me to talk about New York MMA. And I said, well, that's almost impossible, because New York MMA is the newest form of MMA in the world. In the world. The fact that New York has just sanctioned fighting, Ultimate Fighting Championship, mixed martial arts, Bellator, all that, 3 years ago. It is the youngest form of MMA that's available. And they wanted me to talk about New York MMA, who are some up-and-coming fighters. I said, there's amateur, but the pro circuit is so far behind. And then I really started to think of some of the fighters that have come along in New York that I know of. Guys like Rashad, and oddly enough, as I said, Rashad just popped up on my TV here in my office. Guys like Jon Jones. Rashad has always been class personified. He's always been a humble guy. He's represented the sport real well. He's trained many fighters, worked with many fighters. Whereas Jon Jones has really been such a poor representation of what a martial artist is supposed to be outside of the cage. And I feel like it would be best for the sport of MMA if Jon Jones were to lose on December 29th to Alexander Gustaffson, because Gustaffson can carry the torch at light heavyweight very well. It would avoid the situation with Daniel Cormier, because Daniel Cormier is never fighting Gustaffson again, because the first fight between Cormier and Gustaffson did so bad pay-per-view buy-wise that DC just doesn't even want to fight him anymore. So the fact that, Jones is getting in there with Gustaffson, this fight is happening December 29th. I do want Gustaffson to win, and I also have to remind you guys of something. All the people that want to talk about Jon Jones is one of the best ever and great, he's this, he's that. It was his worst fight of his career against Alexander Gustaffson. That was the only fight of his career where he looked human. He looked like he could get hurt. He looked like he just didn't have it that night. I thought he lost the first fight, to be quite honest. I thought he did lose the first fight. He's avoided this rematch for 5 years. This is not a gift giving him this title shot against Alexander Gustaffson. This is not a blessing. This is if you want to be the champ again, you got to go through the toughest test that you've ever faced, buddy. Due to the fact that you've done the things that you've done, we're not just going to give you a cakewalk opponent. We're not going to let you handpick who you fight. Alexander Gustafson's the number 2 guy in your division. You're the number 1 ranked. You guys fight to see who's the best. Whether you guys had to wait 5 years to do it or not, who cares? It's happening. Gustafson's wanted it ever since the moment the first fight ended, and Jon Jones decided that he wanted to keep his belt longer and fight Glover Teixeira. And hey, I'm not saying that he's wrong for that. I'm not saying that he's a coward or anything of that nature. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I am saying is that there's a reason this fight took 5 years to take place again. And it's not because of Alexander Gustafsson. It's because of Jon Jones. So I'll leave you with that, Jones fans. I'll leave you with that, and the fact that I feel that the light heavyweight division would be in a much better state if Gustaffson won on December 29th. And let's just say Gustaffson does win on December 29th. Let's say that happens. Then that would mean that Jones would then fight Gustaffson again. He'd get an immediate rematch because he'd have to do the trilogy. And that would be earned because he did beat him the first time on a judge's decision. Gustaffson beats him the second time around. The third fight would be earned. That's how I feel about that. Jones shouldn't go into this fight as the champ. Gustaffson obviously won't be going into the fight as a champ. This fight is for a vacant title. And even then, I'm on the fence as far as whether that was right or wrong that the UFC took Daniel Cormier's belt away. I'm on the fence about that. I really don't know if that was fair, but then again, is anything in life fair? I'll leave you with that. I'm Ryan Thomas. It was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'd love to see Alexander Gustaffson win on Saturday night, December 29th, 4 days after Christmas. Everybody enjoy your holiday. I will definitely be on live on Facebook to give you my reaction to the Bills game versus the New England Patriots this Sunday. As well, on Sunday night, on December 30th, to give you my reaction to the Bills game against the Miami Dolphins, as well as my reaction to UFC 232. Tune in on Facebook at Thomas Takeover. That's the link that will get you to my page, my Facebook page, where you can see all my live videos, all my takes, all my episodes, right in the link at the top as far as audios. And then you can click videos on the left on the Facebook page and get all my Facebook videos. I really appreciate the support. People, feel free to follow me on Twitter as well at Ryan Thomas Take. Have a good night. Happy holidays, everybody.